Hey, welcome to What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast. I'm your host, John Jang. Here's what we're checking out on this episode. Why is it from time to time our elevators and escalators can be out of service? Let's tap in to What's the Tea.
The next station is
Welcome to What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast.
The public transit system in Metro Vancouver is an expansive one, powered by different modes of transportation that includes the SkyTrain, the C-Bus, the West Coast Express, and all of the different buses that we have on our roads. Needless to say, getting you from here to there requires a lot of operational planning, and it's something that we're doing constantly throughout the day to the point where we are a pretty well-oiled machine. But sometimes the trickiest part of your commute isn't necessarily about going from point A to point B. It's actually just going up and down.
Hold that. How are you? Not great, Bob.
Escalators and elevators at our SkyTrain stations play a very important role in your commuting experience, but it's one of those things where you don't really think about it until it's unavailable. Now, most customers can still take the stairs, but not everyone can make that choice. So what's the tea when these services are down for maintenance? Why can't they just stay in service all the time?
Escalators in SkyTrain get used constantly. There's no breaks because trains coming in every few minutes. So there's always people on the escalators all the time.
This is Sid Akitan, an elevator and escalator technician at SkyTrain. When life keeps you down, it's up to Sid and his team to literally bring you right back up.
There's a lot of people that need the escalators and elevators, right? From mobility wise and all that. So I understand where they're coming from, right? It's a hassle when one of those units are down. But yeah, usually because it's a public unit, things happen all the time. It gets used almost all day, every day, right? So it's like your car, right? It breaks down, you got to fix it. And these things keep on running, So small things such as like a screw or like something in the door sill could just take the elevator or escalator service, right? And you gotta be ready to go to the job.
I want to jump on your car metaphor there a little bit, because you're right. Like, cars do break down over time, but if you are good at maintaining your car, doing regular checkups, you hopefully avoid major issues. So how much of your work is doing preventative maintenance as opposed to doing reactive emergency maintenance, if you will?
For SkyTrain, the standards are pretty high here. So we have a A, a B, and a D. You have a inspection, which is a monthly inspection, where a monthly inspection only takes a few hours. That's the one where you check the external safeties. You check your handrail inlets, your upper handrail inlets, your skirt. If anyone hits the side of it, the unit should stop so no one gets their foot stuck in the side of the escalator. You check your emergency stop buttons, and then you just check the overall step quality. So you run it through, you check all the steps, make sure everything is good, nothing is broken, nothing is defective. So that's your monthly inspection. Now you got your B inspection, which is your quarterly inspection. It's a little more complex. You got to get into the units. So you take 10 steps out, put the hoarding on because you don't want any customers falling in there. You get in there in this confined space and you take 10 steps out. And then you get inside the unit and then you check the internal safeties, the bottom and top, see if all those are working, like such things like tension carriages, your springs, your chain. You check all that, make sure everything is good, everything is lubricated properly, and you do the same thing on top. You check that out, make sure everything is good. Oil the unit, lubricate it properly. That takes about 2 days. Hopefully nothing in that inspection you see out of order or out of the regular. If you see something that's not to code or that's worn out, then it might take a little longer because you got to fix that, rectify that problem. And then your most complex is your D. It's the annual inspection that happens once a year. So for escalators, you got to take out half the steps. So let's say like a station like Granville or Burrard, you got over 100 steps. You got to take out, clean it from top to bottom, the whole unit. And you're in a slope as well, so you can't do it quick. You got to do it slow and steady, because one false move and you're gonna fall down the escalator. You check all that. You check all the nuts and bolts from top to bottom. Check all the safeties. Lubricate the chain. And one day for taking the steps out, and then you have 4 or 5 days to check all the internal safeties, and another whole day to put the steps back in. And hopefully nothing is wrong in that inspection, because if it is, it'll take longer than a week. But usually, if everything goes in order, about a week, I would say, for an annual.
When escalators or elevators do go down, are they down because something did break, or are they usually down because you're actually just maintaining what the system has to go through, like whether it's the monthly, the quarterlies, or the annuals, like you mentioned?
Yeah, well, they break outside of our scope of work as well, because things happen, and just the wear and tear of things as well, right? But mostly when they're down, because we're always working on them, maintaining them, and once you're done the maintenance after all the units, next month happens and you got to do it all over again, and just repetitive. You keep on doing it, so it looks like it's always down, but it's a lot of maintenance involved.
It's quite fascinating, because I think people have to also remember that, yes, we have newer stations, but a lot of the Expo line stations, they were originally designed as part of Expo 86. A lot of that infrastructure is several decades old. Is that a challenge for you and your team, or have you been able to adopt like new technologies over the years to keep it as modern as possible?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, when the Expo line, for example, for the longest time, it was the same units since they installed the Expo line, but now they're retrofitting them, putting new units in there. And I think Burrard's the last one where they're working on to changing it out. Everything else has been retrofitted with new equipment.
This is just my personal observations, but more people are using escalators. So what is the lifespan of that like? If you have managed to fix it up and let's say it's at 100%, at what point does it start getting to a point where it needs critical repairs or something?
Each station is different, I guess, right? Like the amount of usage you get, like for Lake City example, it doesn't get used that much, right? Compared to like Commercial or Burrard or Granville, Waterfront, where it gets heavily used, right?
And then for elevators, obviously they operate very differently from an escalator. And I would imagine there's more moving pieces in an elevator. This is just me being a total rookie. I have no idea. So I'm just making that presumption. Is it generally the same too? It just kind of depends on wear and tear of how busy those elevators might be.
For elevators, like you got hydraulic elevators, which is oil. Burrard and Waterfront, they go up and down constantly, right? So like a car oil heats up, and whereas now the newer units have roped. They use roped and counterweight, so there's no oil involved. So it lasts a little more longer.
Sid, maybe take us through like a comparable. So our escalators are publicly accessible, right? They're open pretty much all day and all night. So how does that compare in terms of maintenance requirements when we try and maybe look at an escalator in a place that's not as busy, let's say in a mall, for example? How does that maybe work for you? Because you know that there's just a frequency difference between ours and theirs, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the escalators in the SkyTrain get used 24/7 all day, constantly. There's no breaks, because there's people the train's coming in every few minutes, so there's always people on the escalators all the time. Whereas in a mall, you got people coming through. People come in like installments, right? And malls only open so and so hours of the day, where the system is open almost all day, every day, 7 days a week, and constantly got people coming through. The sheer volume of the people and the frequency of people, it just never stops on the SkyTrain.
Escalators that maybe get 5 people an hour obviously require less maintenance than escalators that maybe get 20 people a second or something along those lines, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. You got that right. Yeah, for sure. The amount of people makes a big difference, and the frequency, because you got weight on them, you got people using them, you got people hitting them. So the more people that use escalators, the chance of things breaking is more as well.
Maybe you can share this. Like, are there specifically other stations that are just a little bit more tricky to work on? Is it Granville, for example, just because of the sheer size of that escalator? Or is it somewhere else in the system where maybe just because of how it's designed or the space or whatever it might be, it's just sometimes more finicky than some of the others?
Yeah, mostly it's the downtown, like from Commercial onwards, because it gets more busy. That's where everyone piles up there, right? So like for the downtown zones, there's only one elevator in each station, right? So when you take that out of service, there's no way people can, move around, right? And like waterfront, you got the cruise ships coming in, right, with people's bags and all that stuff. So you take it out of service for maintenance, people can't, get out of the station, or they got to walk around or carry up the stairs or the escalator, right? So.
And, I think that's also important to keep in mind. You mentioned it right off the top. Like when elevators and escalators aren't working, it's annoying, but it's not the worst case scenario because the stairs are always available. You and I can walk up and down it, no problem. But those that have physical disabilities, those that might be parents with babies in strollers, those that are, just carrying lots of luggage or whatever it might be, it does create a challenge for things like that. And you mentioned sometimes you have to deal with concerns from customers while you're working on site. But maybe important to keep in mind that these services are way more important for people that just have different challenges than maybe you and I would, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's an inconvenience for the customers, but luckily we have a good team. Like the STAs help out too, right? When we're working on, so they provide assistance, helping the customers while we're working. They set up either the taxi service or just guide them to get where they need to be, right? So it's good that way.
Let's take a quick pause here and really understand why our elevator escalator technicians like Sid take such pride in their work. They recognize the importance of accessibility for our customers. And with that in mind, I want to introduce you to my friend Ben Dooley. Now, Ben lives in Surrey but works in downtown Vancouver and is a regular TransLink customer. Ben was born with spina bifida and uses a wheelchair. This is Ben's story on how an out-of-service elevator can disrupt his daily commute.
Well, it depends on the station. If I go to Granville, that's the station that I use most frequently, and I see that the elevator is out of service, I know that, okay, my plan is to hop back on the train, go to Waterfront, and then transfer to Vancouver City Centre. That's the easiest place for me to go to get me where I need to be. But if it's a station that I'm not as familiar with and there's a broken elevator, then my mind starts racing and I have to, figure out a new plan to get me where I need to be, whether that's, finding a TransLink attendant who might be able to suggest, a different route, calling TransLink customer service and hoping that I can get through in a relatively quick manner and seeing if they have anything to suggest, or sometimes I'll head to Google and do the old Google Maps to punch in my destination and see, how the heck am I gonna get to where I need to be, because this elevator has broken down and I'm not able to use it.
On average, then, maybe it's a little bit tricky, but how much of a delay does that add into your whole commuting time? If we're talking just a one-way trip.
Well, as it just so happens, on my way to work this morning, I ran into a broken elevator.
Oh, no.
At Granville Station. I got a text at 5:55 this morning letting me know that the elevator was out of service. So I could plan, okay, this elevator is out of service. Mm-hmm. Maybe I leave a little bit early today. And so I can account for, the fact that I'm going to have an additional travel time. And with the Granville station, like I said, I'm familiar with Granville. I know, what Plan B is. And so once I figure out Plan B, then that's from Granville to City Center is probably an additional 20 minutes, I would say.
20 minutes.
But again, it depends, because if I don't have an immediate Plan B that I can put into action,
right,
then there's the added time of figuring out what my Plan B is going to be before I can continue on my route.
Again, I've never had to endure something like that before. So take us through almost the whole experience when you know that you got to get off at Vancouver City Centre.
Well, the route that I take, City Centre is actually closer to where I need to be. Mm-hmm. So that's not too bad. But I'll go back to the example of Granville again. Granville has 2 elevators, right, which is great, and I think that every station should have 2 elevators in a perfect world. But one elevator at Granville comes out at about the halfway point of a pretty big hill, and the other elevator comes out at the very bottom of that very big hill.
Right.
So if that elevator that's at the halfway point goes out of service, then I got to start at the bottom of the hill, and it's
a grind.
It's a grind getting up that huge hill. So even, you know, in a scenario where you've got two elevators, if one of them goes out of service, that's still a problem for me.
Yeah. So I think listening to you, it's not so much the reasons why that matter. It's just about making sure the services are as operational as possible.
Yeah, it's making sure that the services are operational, and, you know, communicating what somebody is supposed to do when the elevator is down. Because, you know what, I think that I'm a pretty reasonable person. I understand that, you know, sometimes elevators break, sometimes they need maintenance and they're gonna go out of service. But when they do, tell me, you know, what are my options here? Do I need to take a bus? Do I need to, you know, go to a different SkyTrain station? What are the options that I have to get to where I need to go? Because that's all that matters, is getting me from point A to point B, and that's what's important to me as a commuter. The analogy that I always use, and I'll go back to something you said earlier, when an elevator goes out of service or an escalator goes out of service, you can just use the stairs. But what would happen if the stairs were out of service for you? You know, an elevator going out of service for me is like the stairs going out of service. You know, if the stairs went out of service, you know, that would be a huge inconvenience, a huge problem for the large majority of transit users.
A universally accessible public transit system doesn't just mean our modes of transportation are the ones that live up to those standards. It means bus loops, bus stops and exchanges, SkyTrain stations, they all have to be accessible as well. And this is why elevator maintenance and accessibility play such a key role in the work that we do every single day. With that in mind, let's go and finish up our chat with Sid. It's all about making sure that, again, like everyone's commuting experience is as convenient and as efficient as possible. But of course, sometimes there are things that happen, such as maintenance, where we're trying to do the best we can to make sure that their next trip and the many more trips after that can be reliable and comfortable. So just one thing that I do want to share and keep on top of mind for people that are listening. What are some of the more common issues with escalators and elevators, if you can share that? Like, is it just something gets stuck and then all of a sudden everything freezes and you have to find which part of it gets stuck, or is it kind of more elaborate than that?
So in my experience, for escalators, the most common problems I had is screws in the treads of the combs, because there's safeties where if there's a screw that's stuck in the comb, it stops it, making sure that nothing breaks the combs on the top, right, or the bottom. So it just shuts it down. So that's the most common for the escalators. For the elevators, the most common problem are the doors. If anything gets jammed in the doors, like a safety thing, right? In case someone's hand or something, it stops, or even in the sill, there's something jammed in there, it shuts it down, right? So that's the most common issues that I've had with those units.
Do you find a lot of like lost items that people have dropped that in that space between the elevator and then, you know, the platform? Like, you know, I think people might drop probably coins, maybe sometimes a cell phone. I hope it doesn't happen too often, but like, do you find things like that down there when you're clearing it out?
Oh yeah. I found tons of random stuff. That's where I get my tips from, right? All the $5. That's from my work and my hard work, right? So yeah, but a lot of random stuff. Phones. I've dropped my phone many times in there, you know.
Oh, good.
A bunch of new phones, right? Like Compass cards, credit cards, debit cards.
I want to share a story with you, Sid. When I was younger and my family had immigrated from Korea, like not that long prior, I was new to the country. I didn't read English that well. And my mom took me to Lougheed Mall. Inside Lougheed Mall, there's many escalators. And I remember looking at this thing because I don't think I'd ever seen an escalator before. And there's this big shiny red button right near the bottom of it. It's the emergency button. Of course, I didn't know that. And being just a curious child, I pressed it. And then all of a sudden, everyone got mad at me because the escalator stops working. Yeah. How annoying is that for you and your team? Like, if somebody just even accidentally presses that button, is it kind of simple to turn it back on again? Or do you actually have to go through an inspection process just to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the whole thing?
Oh, no. If that happens, that's not a really big deal for us. We go in there. I like those calls. They're easy fixes. You just go in there and turn the key on and you're good to go. But like, let's say if you got to fall on an escalator or something like that, then you got to check. You got to basically do a monthly inspection on it just to make sure that it's not caused by the escalator. So that's the only thing. But like something like what you did, like push the stop button, it's no big deal.
Okay, good, because I felt really bad after, ultimately when I start to look up and I see everyone's just looking around confused, and then there's just me with my hand on the red button. I bolted as quickly as I could, but yeah. I'm glad to know. So thank you for making small young John at least a little bit relieved that didn't ruin somebody's day too badly. And so I guess like the final note to people listening is that yes, like the public perception is that when escalators or elevators aren't working, you don't know whether it's not working because it's just broken and out of service, or because your team is actually doing the maintenance. But at the end of the day, it sounds like there's more maintenance than there is actually breakdowns. That's just my takeaway from you.
100% for sure. Because like I said, it's a public unit, so we got to be on top of the ball on this, right? Keep everything up to date. Make sure everything is safety wise, everything is good, everything is working. All the switches are working. All the safety components are working. So I understand where the customer is coming from. When they look at it, it's always down, but on our end, we got to do our safety checks, and it's just a repetitive thing over and over again.
It's worth repeating. Safety is our #1 priority no matter what. And that's why maintenance of our systems from top to bottom is such a high priority in ensuring reliable public transit options for everyone. In a perfect world, maintenance wouldn't matter because wear and tear simply wouldn't exist. But here in the real world, it takes skilled and well-trained technicians like Sid and his team to make sure that your next trip will be as smooth as possible. My thanks to Sid Akitan for providing valuable insight on his work, Ben Dooley for taking the time to share his thoughts with me, producer Alan and Alex Jackson for the logistics and planning on this episode, and you for listening and subscribing. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of What's the Tea, the TransLink podcast. I've been your host, John Jang, and until next time, have a safe trip.